On today's Food for Thought podcast, I'm with Kathryn Colas, who's a hugely respected voice for women going through menopause. She's the founder and chief executive of Simply Hormones, who is recognised for her work with public and private sector organisations in improving understanding of menopausal symptoms. Her aim is to empower women with better information and influence policy and practices to improve their daily lives. Kathryn became the first and only layperson to be appointed to the Medical Advisory Committee of the British Menopause Society, a post she's held since 2013. She's also a member of the Executive Committee for Wishes, Action and Support for Invisible Illness. Welcome, Kathryn, to Food for Thought.
Thank you very much, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure. But this is something that's really close to my own heart, because when I worked in HR, I took on a job that actually the stress of it created symptoms, and I was also going through perimenopause, and nobody understood the absolute madness I felt in my head. So when Sue got in touch with me, I got very, very excited about talking to you.
Yes.
So
did you recognize that you were going through menopause then? Because that's it. That's the hardest. That's the brick wall that's sitting there. I resigned from my job. Women are going through all sorts of battles in the workplace. They're going through disciplinary procedures. They're having arguments with their team, with their managers. And nobody is getting the fact that what age group is she, and could this be perimenopause?
It's really interesting. It is, absolutely. And in 2015, the government's official business champion for older workers, Ros Altman, observed in her report that, which was a new vision for older workers, for those of you who'd like to read it, that currently there's no training for line managers to deal with the issue of menopause. Now, you responded by actually developing what is the first program and work-based program for both HR and for line managers, and launched it last year, didn't you? So why does this women's issue need training in the workplace?
Because nobody understands it, nobody recognises it. And I started out, as I said, I resigned from my own job, and I thought, is this as good as it gets? What's this all about? Eventually discovered that I was perimenopausal, going through menopause, diagnosed with depression, all sorts of crazy things going on. And then I thought, well, I'm not the only one this is happening to. I discovered so many other women, millions of women in the UK that it's happening to. And I started attending medical conferences and, busily writing notes. And then all of a sudden I sat up and thought, hang on a minute, there's a name for this and there's a name for that. And it seems to me that the academics are talking to academics and nobody's telling the women on the ground what they're going through, and that people do understand it. So that's when I started, I've got to do something about it, and Simply Hormones was born. And really at the beginning, I just went out telling my story to whoever would listen. And gradually, you're listening to what people are saying, you're going into the workplace, you're listening to managers, and then you say, well, hang on a minute. Women are frightened of putting their hand up and saying, I think I'm going through menopause, please don't sack me. And managers are saying, we've got these crazy women and we don't know how to deal with them. I even heard phrases used like, I can't work with this woman, we've got to get rid of her, that type of thing. And nobody really understanding what's going on. So I thought, well, that's it. Okay. Over a period of 10 years, I managed to put together what's happening. So without giving people a biology lesson, either the men or the women, just to let them know the generics of menopause, the time scale, some of the symptoms, but then gender differences is big in our training, but also to have those embarrassing conversations so that it doesn't have to be an issue anymore. And that's how we've progressed.
Now, is it really surprising in many respects? Because in 2012, there was a piece of research done in Europe that effectively showed it went across 41 countries, 5,000 companies. And the gender split for senior managers and for managers was about 65 to 70%. It's shifted since that particular piece of research, only slightly though. And so you've got about 30% women in those roles, and then the rest are men. So is it really surprising when you've got such a heavy managerial gender bias that this isn't actually very well known or actually well attended to?
That's right, and it is women leading the way, actually. I did try to go down the route of taking this into the workplace and talking to male managers about it. But they're so reluctant to join in the conversation. And it's really women that have stood up and said, right, okay, I've had enough of this. Or they hear me speak and they say, oh my God, somebody knows something about menopause. And they're not throwing medical stuff at us. They're just telling us like it is. And they are managers and they need the information for themselves and for the women in their teams, and then they start talking to their male managers, and the whole thing softens. The outline becomes much more softened, and then the managers realise there are issues, that they don't want to lose valuable members of staff, and the best way to do that is to understand more about the subject and get everybody talking and understanding, and happy days, away we go. And that's what's beginning to happen now.
So what's been the response directly of some of the line managers and of the senior managers?
They're saying things like, we want to give support to our staff, but we don't know how. Thank you so much for providing this information. Women and men alike are running with it, as they say, in their organisation, saying, look, I've got this information. We can now do something about this. It doesn't have to be a taboo subject anymore. We can change workplace culture without anybody realising it, just by understanding this natural progress of a woman's reproductive life called menopause.
And you talk about workplace culture there, because obviously if you have got member of your staff who is deeply depressed, high anxiety, suffering from sleep issues, not coping very well, etc., in effect, that is going to change the dynamics of the group and the performance of actually the workload. Isn't that right, isn't it?
Yeah, and when we're talking we do what we call a taster session initially, so it can be a mixed gender audience, and we're just talking generally about things. And they're beginning to recognise that they have women in their teams that this is happening to. One woman came up to me recently. She's been put on report because she fell asleep at her desk. And others, there's another one who had profuse sweating and they don't know how to deal with it. HR and Occ Health couldn't help her. She was just told to bring more clothes in. And so men are recognising, hang on a minute, this is happening. Why aren't we recognising the symptoms? A, because we don't know what's going on. So I created this thing called menopause traffic lights. So it gives, red, amber, green, a list of age groups and what recommendations for what could be happening in those age groups. And I've included men, say in the 45 to 55 age group, because not only are they probably managers, but they may have a partner at home going through it, and if they do, they are the ones that recognise it's happening in their team. But again, they're having enough arguments at home. They don't want to have this barrage of offence coming through their ears when they get to work as well. So they're very keen just to say, okay, just what's going on? Tell me what's happening. Tell me what we can do about it. So it's all about deciding what's going on, outcomes and results, and what the timescale is. And certainly within the organisations I've been in, they are changing their absenteeism procedures to be more flexible, and they're starting to write menopause policies. So very, minute. I can't cover the world just yet, but we're making a good start, and the word is spreading, and people are readily accepting what's going on.
So what exactly would be in a menopause policy, for instance? Because I would like to know some of the policies and procedures that have actually changed accordingly. And you're saying about the sick absence, which makes absolute sense. But a menopause policy, how does that actually stack up?
I've just completed one today, actually. So it's just saying, what is menopause? It's often called the change of life, and just saying that it's not classed as an illness, just awareness. Some women require medical advice and treatment. It's a natural process. Talking about current research, the research that you've just mentioned, and also there's been some in 2011, the British Occupational Health Research, which I quote a lot in my presentations, actually. It was done by Professor Amanda Griffiths, and she was saying things like the women they interviewed, over half of them said that they did not disclose their symptoms to their manager because they were too embarrassed. Working practices were not designed for menopausal women in mind. Even things like heavy and painful periods, hot flushes, just to be aware of that and that it's causing some distress to a certain number of women. Women aren't comfortable disclosing this thing. They're taking time off and not being truthful about why they're taking time off because nobody understands it. So I suppose they say something like it's women's issues, and the men go, oh God, women issues. All right then, see you later. And it's also suggesting to managers, asking managers if they feel they have sufficient knowledge and would they like training. And other things like that, and giving them a basic outline of symptoms. And there's a similar leaflet for women that just goes into a little more detail about symptoms and how they feel about them. So it's really, I think for me, when I found a list of symptoms, that was a eureka moment. We're talking, over 10 years ago now, and I thought, all these things have names. And this was before I went to the medical conferences, printed it off, showed my husband, and he was astounded as well. And because I'm sure he thought I was making it all up. But then, of course, you get probably a typical male reaction that goes something like, okay, so now you know about it, you'll be all right next week, won't you? But it's not quite like that. So it's just really acknowledging their symptoms, acknowledging the different pathways you can take to help yourself recover as a woman, and what you can do as a manager to provide support, and having an action plan, really, so that you've got objectives and outcomes.
No, it's interesting it's taken you the 10 years to develop it, because in many respects that's the length of time that a woman would probably be going through the whole series of symptoms, symptomology. And one of the hardest ones to actually talk about is the mental health side of it and the change of that, because of course in some working environments, particularly male-dominated environments, and as you see, they're predominantly male-dominated at certain levels, it is extremely difficult to start to tell people that you have got depression or that you're feeling a little bit crazy, isn't it? And it could actually lose you your job in many respects. Yes,
and also, although there's a lot of noise out there now about recognising mental health issues and providing support, but I didn't know. I was diagnosed with depression, and it took me some years. I think I was on the board with the Menopause Society, British Menopause Society, surrounded by a whole group of clinical experts in their field. So there are some gynecologists, oncologists, heart specialists, endocrinologists, you name it. They were all there. So I asked the question. In fact, I was interviewing one of the chaps, Professor John Studd, about menopause, about depression at menopause, because it seemed so common. And then I was enlightened at that time to find out there's such a thing as hormonal depression. So many women are being misdiagnosed. And it seems to be that when you go to your GP, that your GP should be looking at your notes and looking at your medical history about maybe periods, whether you've had any kind of melancholy or depression going through your reproductive years, if you've given birth to babies, whether you've had postnatal depression or anything like that, because all that links to menopause. And if they can see that that's happened during that time, then it's 10 to 1 that you're going to have hormonal depression at menopause. And it's quite a different pathway to recovering from that than if it was mental health diagnosed. That's the difficulty.
It's really interesting, isn't it, in regards to that, because obviously that estrogen, the drop in the estrogen effectively is, people do not link it with depression at all. And it's so shame that it's not identified. But I do think there's a huge lack of education that you're stepping into. Really sad that it's having to be done in the workplace, because in many respects this should be done as part of our overall education for a woman,
yes,
about what exactly happens through the different stages of our life. Because many people will just come to me as a naturopath and will say to me, actually, I'm going through the change of life, my period's stopping. And that is
yes,
that's the only thing they're actually linking it to.
yes,
Not the other series of symptoms.
No.
Do you want to actually educate us in some of the symptoms that actually can happen as things change? Do you want to just take us through that?
Yes, there are all sorts of symptoms, both emotional and physical. And I feel there are probably a lot more emotional ones than physical ones. And it's like PMS on speed, I call it. So some of those symptoms you might get on a monthly basis are suddenly brought together in closer sequence, and you start to experience that on a much more regular basis. And there'll be gaps. You'll feel good, you'll feel bad. But for me, the first thing that I experienced was feeling that I had a hangover every morning. And yes, I have a glass or two of wine at night, and I'm not a heavy drinker. And so I thought, okay, let's cut out the alcohol, see what happens. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. Didn't make a slightest bit of difference. And so I ended up with a list of not crazy symptoms, minimal symptoms really, that you might associate with PMS. You've got your bellyache, your backache, you're feeling a bit melancholy, and then you might be, I diagnosed myself with bipolar disorder, and I knew it wasn't really bipolar because that's a serious mental health condition. But again, talking through this with my professor, and he said, oh yes, my dear, that's so common. So there's obviously that issue of that period in a woman's life where she can go crazy. And why do we allow that to happen? So all these different things associated with the emotions, with being aggressive, with crying at the drop of a hat, and feeling that you're worthless, losing your self-confidence, just feeling that you can't cope generally.
Now, these symptoms with menopause that you're talking about become heightened with stress.
Yes.
And, then with stress, we get sleep disruption, you get the dietary indiscretions, the bottle of wine in the evening, more sugar, then it leads to heightened symptoms of menopause. And yet, are we addressing the stress in the workforce? In the workplace aspect of things, because stress in our workforce is actually carried like a badge of honour, particularly in more male-dominated work environments. Are you actually helping to address that in the programme you're actually doing?
Yes, we do, because there's this huge thing about stress and anxiety in the workplace, and everybody's putting it down to the pressures and the amount of work that they're doing in order to meet standards and whatever else, meet deadlines. But what nobody's recognising is that women of a certain age, let's say 45 to 55, are having maybe having anxiety attacks anyway that have absolutely nothing to do with the work they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's because their hormones are up and down like a fiddler's elbow, and they don't know whether they're coming or going. And so if they then have that added pressure of stress within what they are trying to achieve on any particular day, then it just exacerbates it. Then the hormones, the brain thinks, oh, hang on a minute, we need some more hormones in there to try and relieve this situation, or to, the fight or flight, need to throw some adrenaline at it. And and so it's on a hiding to nothing. Sorry, I had a phone call there.
It's okay.
And lost my train of thought. And so we're missing the point. The workplace is missing the point. They're not addressing the age group that is being affected, and therefore are missing the fact that they may be under particular stress with the job they're doing, but we're missing the point about the hormones, which is only exacerbating it.
Do you know what the percentage of women going through menopause is in the workplace in the UK?
Yeah, unfortunately, the research isn't there yet to highlight that area. But what we do know is that 75% of all women will experience debilitating symptoms. Mm. And I think there are so many statistics out there, but one of the ones I've seen is that there are 13 million women in that age group. I think 75% of them are working. But if you take the 13 million as a number, that leaves 8 million. So it's not a minority issue that are experiencing symptoms in one form or another and in varying degrees that could be causing problems to their daily lives, both at home and at work.
That's an astonishing number, really, isn't it?
It is.
And to pick up on an earlier point, half of the women that you've talked about do not disclose that they are having an issue that is causing them this distress. But in many respects, we need them to, don't we? We need them to actually come forward, because actually things won't change unless they come forward and the statistics start to back up that they are having a problem.
That's right. And that will only happen once the employer recognises menopause as a natural process in the order of life, and that it can cause distress, but then it's easy to deal with it once you've got some information to hand and you know what to do, how to do, and when to do it.
Because in many respects, some of these women are probably being dealt with, and they've probably been passed on by the line manager to occupational health because of stress-related issues and anxiety, and it's all put under performance, and they just think it's that. And in fact, they may be starting perimenopause and have not identified the symptoms themselves.
Absolutely. That's correct. And we speak a lot to occupational health nurses, and sometimes because they are in the right age group, they're recognising it, and they're recognising it again with the women that are coming through their department, but they're telling us we don't have the tools to deal with it. All we have is that we can refer them for mental health support, which is going down such the wrong road that it's no wonder that women feel as if they're going round the bend.
And why depression is starting to go up and up. We've got a massive mental health issue in the UK.
And depression at that age group, certainly in the workplace and even among women and among our GPs, is straight away it signals mental health issues. But nobody is considering that actually it's hormonal depression they're probably experiencing, which again is a whole different pathway to go down with completely different routes or opportunities available to overcome it.
Now, we're missing this opportunity, aren't we, in regards to these organisations, because the Women and Work Commission found that unleashing women's full potential could be worth $23 billion a year to the Exchequer, and that was in 2013.
Yes, yeah. And in that particular age, they are now coming into their own, and they're looking for new challenges. They are ripe to develop the experience that they've got and move forward to do brilliant things.
And programmes such as yours to support women are cost effective, aren't they? Because in regards to performance returns, according to McKinsey, companies across all sectors with the most women on their boards of directors significantly and consistently outperform those with no female representation by 41% in terms of return on equity, and by 56% in terms of operating results.
I know, it's unbelievable, isn't it? And yet still there's nobody pushing that forward and saying, look, we've got to do something about this. It's obviously going to be to the benefit of our organisation. The return on investment is negligible, because all you're doing is acknowledging that a process is happening within this woman. She now recognises it. The workplace now recognise it, They both know what they can do about it, so that's going to have a successful outcome. And surely, why shouldn't we be taking advantage of this? Why lose all this talent? It doesn't make sense.
Well, if you've got shareholders, you need to be addressing them, because I'm sure they would be directing the fact that they would like a 56% return.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, but nobody does, do they? And it seems to me that it's always women that are leading the way. When we go into the workplace, it's as a result of women that have contacted us. They're senior managers. They're well connected within their organisation. They're going through menopause themselves, and they recognise that it's happening to other members of their team or within other areas of the organisation, and they want it to happen, and that's when it happens. It's certainly not from the other side of things when male managers come to us. They accept it when they are given the information. They absorb it and they say, yeah, we're happy to support this. We have the empathy. We have the sympathy. We've got the right people in place that can do this. Just tell us how. But it always seems to come from the women. They're the ones that initiate it.
So how many organisations have you worked with so far with the programme that you've created?
Oh, gosh. I've never sat down and counted them, but it must be going on for about 20 now. And we work a lot with emergency forces like the police, fire and rescue, teachers, law firms, just across the board, all sorts. And it's women that have initiated the contact and said, we want what you've got. We need to do something about this. We recognise it's happening, and certainly for our own benefit, I want it for me, and then I can help my colleagues, and that's what's happening.
So where do people find? I know you're doing some events. Did you want to talk about some of those events that you're doing, and then how do people go about finding you and getting in contact?
Okay, yes, we've got what we've started to do is women-only events. So not only do we go into the workplace now, we're now doing external events for women. To have an away day when we discuss all about menopause, and they have an action plan that they can start on the day, so they go home with a smile on their face and a plan, which has always got to be beneficial. And this is coming up on the 1st of April at a lovely country house hotel near Gatwick Airport, Stanhill Court Hotel. And in any event, if anybody wants to get to know more about whatever aspect of menopause, whether it's for themselves or the workplace, just go to simplyhormones.com for all the contact information, and we'll get in touch with you back from there. But yes, it's really taking off now. It's such good news. I can't tell you how pleased it makes me, because I always felt now I know what's happened to me, I can't let that happen to other women. It's just not fair. And it took me years to work out what to do, and now we've found the right method and an acceptable way of doing it, and it's working, and women don't have to suffer anymore. There's no need to.
Kathryn, it's a fantastic interview. Thank you very, very much for coming on Food for Thought and Natural Health Radio.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you.